From an anonymous letter, the vampire king learns the truth about a girl, her pain, her hidden past, and the power concealed deep within her. At 3 a.m., he comes to meet her. What begins as a search for the letter's secret soon turns into an encounter that binds not only the mystery, but their destinies forever. Rain had been falling for hours, the kind that makes a city forget it ever saw the sun. In a small third-floor apartment, a girl with tired eyes sat at a shaky desk, pressing her pen so hard into the paper that the tip almost tore through. She wrote as if the page was the only living thing that still listened to her, as if the person she was writing to wasn't a myth, but her last, impossible hope. Her name was Luna. Everyone called her quiet, strange, too much in her own head. Nobody knew that the silence around her was heavy, almost physical, like a hand on her throat. The lights in her building flickered, a pipe in the wall hissed. Somewhere downstairs, someone laughed too loudly at a late-night show. But inside Luna's room, the only sound that truly mattered was the soft, uneven scratch of her pen and the way her breath shook every few seconds. She stared at the finished letter for a long time before she folded it. On the front, in small, careful handwriting, she wrote the most ridiculous address she could think of, to the vampire king who sees what humans hide. It should have been a joke, a story idea, something to crumple and throw away after a lonely night. Instead, her hand refused to move toward the trash. She pressed the letter to her chest for a moment, eyes closed, as if she were praying to something she didn't really believe in. "I know you're not real," she whispered to the room. "But if you are, if you really hear the broken ones, please just read this, even if you never come." Her words floated up to the damp ceiling and disappeared. She laughed at herself, a short, embarrassed sound, then slipped into the hallway. The building smelled like old dust and cheap detergent. At the entrance, the night air rushed in, cold and wet, tasting like metal and rain. She ran across the street to the old iron mailbox on the corner, its paint chipped and rusted. It groaned softly when she opened it, like it was tired of carrying secrets. Luna hesitated. For a heartbeat, she imagined someone finding the letter, posting it online, mocking her for believing in monsters with kind eyes and ancient hearts. But there was something else inside her too, something small and stubborn that refused to die, a spark that whispered, "Do it." What if, before she could lose that tiny courage, she dropped the letter in? The soft clink of paper hitting metal sounded far louder than it should. In another part of the city, beyond what humans called possible, there was a place the living never saw. It was not a castle in the sky or a ruin in the woods, but a shadow layered over the city itself, like another world resting on top of this one. High above the streets, in a hall lit only by moonlight and starlight caught in crystal, the vampire king stood at a window watching the rain. His name in the language of his kind was something like Caelan, though humans would never pronounce it quite right. His hair was pale as frost, his eyes a deep, steady red that held more years than the city's oldest stones. He wore a dark, tailored coat, a silver chain glinted at his throat. To most of his kind, he was a legend of power, an unshakable ruler who never slept and never feared. But if they could have seen his face in that quiet moment by the window, they would have noticed something else, the weight in his gaze, the tired kind of loneliness that no throne could fix. Every night, letters appeared on the obsidian table at the center of his hall. Nobody knew exactly how. They simply arrived, slipping through the thin places between worlds, pulled in by an ancient agreement older than written language. Most were made of darkness, pleas for power, for revenge, for eternal youth. People begging him to hurt others or to escape the price of their own choices. He read them all with the same calm, distant expression, then burned them in a cold, white fire that smelled like nothing at all. "This age is louder," he murmured to himself, running a pale thumb along the edge of one letter before dropping it into the flame. "More desperate, less patient." From the shadows near the wall, his oldest advisor shifted. Aramis had served beside him for centuries, his hair gone as white as snow, his presence quiet and dependable. "And yet," Aramis said softly, "you still read every letter, my king." Caelan's mouth barely moved, something like a tired smile flickering and vanishing. "Once there were fewer of us, every voice mattered. I will not let time make me cruel." He turned away from the window just as a new letter blinked into existence on the table. It fell with a faint whisper of paper on stone. Caelan paused, feeling a strange, delicate tug in the air, as if a thin thread had just brushed against his heart. He crossed the room in a long, controlled stride, the hem of his coat trailing like a shadow. The letter was small, plain, human. No perfume, no special ink, no attempt at magic. Just an ordinary piece of paper, folded carefully with fragile hope pressed into every crease. On the front, in a handwriting that tried to be neat and almost succeeded, were the words, "To the vampire king who sees what humans hide." Aramis watched closely. "Another one?" he asked. "What do they want this time? Power, immortality?" Caelan traced the letters on the envelope with one fingertip. His hand stilled. There was something in those strokes, hesitation, fear, a kind of trembling sincerity. For the first time in a very long time, his chest tightened before he even broke the seal. "No," he said quietly, "this one feels different." He unfolded the letter. The ink was slightly smudged in places, as if tears had fallen before the words were dry. As he read, the hall around him seemed to fade, the silvery light, the crystals, the shadows of his advisors all blurring at the edges. There was only the girl's voice on the paper, small and honest and painfully brave. She did not ask him to hurt anyone. She did not ask for beauty or immortality. She did not even ask for herself to be saved in the way others meant it. She wrote about feeling invisible in a world of noise, about feeling like her kindness made her weak and her dreams made her foolish. She wrote about standing up for people who never thanked her, about losing everything she had been working for because she chose honesty over comfort. She wrote that sometimes she wished she could just disappear. And then, in one uneven line near the end, she wrote, "But if you really see what humans hide, then maybe you already know I'm still trying not to give up." Caelan read that line 3 times. He had watched empires rise and fall, had seen cities burn and rebuild, had listened to 1,000 desperate voices begging for everything this girl did not ask for. Her letter was filled with quiet courage wrapped in exhaustion, with kindness that had nowhere to go. She had written as if he were real and also knew he probably wasn't, and somehow that made her faith more pure, not less. For the first time in centuries, something like shame touched him. He, who had promised himself he would not close his heart, had begun to drift farther and farther from the people he once swore to protect in the dark. "She is only human," Aramis said gently, stepping closer when he saw Caelan's expression change. "You cannot answer every hurting heart, my king. If you did, you would shatter yourself." Caelan's jaw tightened. He looked down at the last lines of the letter, a simple "thank you for reading, even if this ends in a trash can," followed by a small, uncertain signature, "Luna." "Do you remember," Caelan asked quietly, "the first night our kind made the pact, when we swore we would walk between monsters and men and keep the balance not for power but for mercy?" Aramis's gaze softened with memory. "I remember, it was your idea." "You said then," Caelan continued, his voice like distant thunder softened by snow, "that if we ever stopped listening, we would become the very creatures they feared us to be." Aramis opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, low and restless. "I have watched armies," Caelan said, folding the letter with slow precision, "kings, conquerors, tyrants. I have seen courage dressed in armor and cruelty dressed in gold. But this," he tapped the folded paper against his chest, just above the silver chain. "This is a girl with nothing. No throne, no army, not even certainty that I exist. And yet she writes to me with more honesty than any king who has ever knelt before me." He turned to the window again, eyes narrowing as he looked down through layers of shadow and stone, past the veil that separated his realm from the human city. Somewhere below, in that maze of lights and rain-soaked streets, a small window glowed weakly on the third floor of a tired building. He could not see her, not yet, but he felt the faint echo of her presence like a candle flame flickering in a storm. Aramis's voice was almost a whisper. "What are you thinking, my king?" Caelan's answer was quiet, but it carried the weight of a decision that could not be undone. "I am thinking," he said, "that for once in a very long time I will not send an answer in dreams or whispers. I will go myself." Aramis stiffened. "To the human world, in person, that hasn't been done in 312 years," Caelan finished softly. "Since the night we nearly lost the pact, I know." It is dangerous, Aramis warned. If the wrong eyes see you. If the wrong eyes see me, Caelan said, turning from the window with a calm that made the air feel suddenly colder, they will remember what I am and what I can do. But that is not why I am going. He slid the letter into the inner pocket of his coat over his heart. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what she might look like, frightened perhaps, but still standing, tired but not entirely broken. He felt a strange, unfamiliar urgency pushing at him from inside. Then why, Aramis asked, almost pleading. Why risk everything for one human girl who doesn't even know you're real? Caelan met his advisor's gaze. In his eyes there was not the cold cruelty the old stories gave his kind, but a deep, quiet ache and a surprising tenderness. Because if a girl like this learns that even monsters see her, truly see her, she might never become one herself, he said. And if I ignore her, then perhaps I have already become what they fear. He stepped toward the great iron doors at the end of the hall. They opened for him without a touch, groaning softly as if they knew the weight of what he was about to do. The rain outside the veil of his realm looked thicker now, like a curtain he would soon walk through. Aramis took a breath. When will you go? Caelan did not hesitate. Tonight, at the hour when the world is most fragile. His hand brushed the pocket where her letter rested. The clock in the hall struck once, twice, its slow, echoing chime rolling through the shadows. He looked up at it, then at the city below. 3 in the morning, he murmured, when even hope is half asleep. As he stepped through the threshold, the last of the moonlight caught on the edge of his coat, and for the first time in centuries, the vampire king left his hidden throne to walk among the living. Far below, in that small third-floor apartment, Luna lay awake in the darkness, unaware that the ancient promise she had written into the night was already moving toward her door. And when Caelan's boots finally touched the wet pavement of the human street, the rain around him went suddenly, eerily quiet, as if the night itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen when a weary human heart and a tired immortal one finally met. The first thing he noticed was the cold. Not the sharp, clean cold of his own realm, but a heavy, human kind of chill that crawled into wet clothes and shook tired bones. Rain slid down the sides of the buildings, glowing under streetlights that hummed faintly, buzzing with electricity. Cars hissed past in the distance, their tires slicing through puddles. Neon signs flickered in blues and reds, bleeding color onto the pavement. The city was alive even at this hour, but in a tired, fractured way like it was talking in its sleep. Caelan stood beneath a crooked street lamp, the hood of his dark coat pulled low. To anyone glancing his way, he would look like just another insomniac crossing the street too late at night. Still, the air bent subtly around him, the shadows leaning closer, the light warping just enough that the human eye would slip away, refusing to focus on him for too long. Old instincts wrapped themselves around his presence, keeping him half hidden even when he did nothing. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened. Human hearts beat on every side of him, 1,000 soft drums layered over each other. Some were fast with anxiety, some slow with sleep, some unsteady with illness or age. Beneath them all he found it, a quieter rhythm, fragile but stubborn, a heart that had cried itself tired and yet still kept going. Luna. Well, he started walking. The sidewalks glistened like liquid glass. The air smelled of wet asphalt, cheap coffee from an all-night shop, and faint cigarette smoke drifting from a doorway. A stray cat darted across his path, fur plastered to its sides, its yellow eyes reflecting the street lamp as it paused to stare at him. For a heartbeat, the cat didn't run. It seemed to sense something ancient in him, something dangerous and strangely quiet. Then it blinked, shook the rain from its whiskers, and vanished into an alley. Caelan's boots made almost no sound on the wet pavement. He didn't need the letter to guide him. Now that he had touched the thread of Luna's presence, he could follow it easily. But his hand still brushed the pocket over his heart from time to time, as if to reassure himself that the fragile piece of paper was really there, that this wasn't some strange dream conjured up by his own centuries of loneliness. This world has changed, he murmured under his breath, passing a shop window where mannequins stood frozen in bright clothes. So loud, so bright, and still they managed to feel alone. A pair of teenagers stumbled out of a late-night diner, laughing too loudly as they shoved each other, their faces glowing blue from their phones. One of them nearly bumped into him, then frowned, squinting as if trying to place what he just brushed past. A second later, the boy shook his head, like he'd forgotten what he'd been looking at, and followed his friend down the sidewalk. Caelan watched them go, a small ache pressing behind his ribs. "You have no idea how lucky you are," he whispered, too soft for them to hear, "to be able to touch someone's shoulder and not think of the centuries it will echo through." He turned the corner onto Luna's street. Everything here felt smaller, more worn. The buildings leaned a little as if they had grown tired over the years. The paint peeled, the steps sagged. A flickering sign on a corner store sent out an anemic yellow light. A bus stop shelter stood half graffitied, its glass smeared with fingerprints and old rain. He looked up. There, third floor. One window with thin curtains lit only by the pale blue glow of a computer screen. Behind that tired glass, he felt her presence more clearly now, restless, raw, strangely gentle even in its pain. For a moment, standing in the rain, Caelan hesitated. He had faced warlords and monsters, stood in burning cities and on crumbling castle walls. But the idea of knocking on a human girl's door, of standing there as she opened it to see him, truly see him, filled him with a quiet kind of fear he hadn't felt in centuries. Not the fear of being hurt, but the fear of hurting, of being too much, too strange, too old and too heavy for someone who still believed in things like letters to myth. Lightning flashed somewhere far away, just a faint silver pulse behind the clouds. "You chose this," he reminded himself softly. "You left the safety of your distance because you said you would not become unkind." He stepped forward. Inside the building, the stairwell smelled like damp carpet, metal, and old paint. A single bulb buzzed overhead, threatening to die with every flicker. His footsteps echoed just enough to sound human, but the shadows along the walls curled toward him like familiar hands. He reached the third floor. Luna's door was the second on the right. The number was slightly crooked, one nail missing. Someone had stuck a fading sticker of a small moon near the knob. Caelan's gaze lingered on that, such a simple, hopeful thing, before settling on the door itself. He could hear her. Her heartbeat was uneven, a little too fast. She was awake, moving restlessly. He could make out the faint rasp of fabric as she shifted, the creak of her mattress, the soft, tired sigh she didn't know she'd just released. He heard the click of her mouse, the faint, tinny sound of a video playing at low volume, used more as background noise than real entertainment. "Why am I nervous?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone. "She's the one who thinks she's alone." He raised his hand. Inside, Luna stared at the comments section of a video she shouldn't have read. Her eyes burned, not from the screen, but from the weight of words that didn't even know her and yet cut like they did. Too dramatic. Attention seeker. If you're so sad, just stop whining and get over it. She took a shaky breath and scrolled faster, as if speed could blur the letters into something less sharp. Her tiny desk lamp cast a weak circle of light. The rest of the room felt like it was sinking into shadow. Her hands were cold. She rubbed them together and glanced at the corner where her worn-out backpack slumped against the wall, still half unpacked from the day she'd left the job that had broken her in a way she hadn't expected. "You did the right thing," she whispered to herself. "You didn't lie, you didn't stay quiet." Her voice shook. "So why does it feel like you threw your life away?" Outside her door, Caelan's knuckles hovered inches from the wood. He could turn back. He could leave the letter on her windowsill like a ghost and vanish before she ever knew he'd been there. He could send comfort in the form of a dream, soft and distant, the way he'd done for countless others. It would be easier, safer, cleaner. But he remembered the line from her letter. "If you really see what humans hide, then maybe you already know I'm still trying not to give up." "Trying," he repeated quietly. "She is still trying. That is worth more than any crown." He knocked. The sound was gentle, but in the silence of Luna's tiny apartment, it rang out like something breaking. She froze, her fingers stilled on the mouse. The video kept playing, voices murmuring to no one. She glanced at the clock in the corner of her screen. 2:59 a.m. Another knock, a little firmer this time, but not impatient. not threatening, just there waiting. Her mind raced. Nobody visited at this hour. Her few friends were all asleep or working late-night shifts. The neighbors usually stumbled home loudly, keys jingling, doors slamming. This was different, too calm, too intentional. Her chest tightened. She stood up slowly, her bare feet touching the cold, scuffed floor. The lamplight painted a thin, golden line along the path from her desk to the door. Who? She whispered, then stopped, realizing whoever was out there couldn't hear her. She crossed the room, every step a negotiation between curiosity and fear. Her imagination ran wild. Maybe it was management, maybe an emergency, maybe some stranger at the wrong door. But underneath all those guesses, deep, deep down where she didn't dare look too closely, something else flickered. What if? She reached for the chain lock with shaking hands, sliding it carefully into place before even touching the knob. Who is it? She called, trying to keep her voice steady and failing. I don't open this late unless I know who. On the other side, Caelan closed his eyes for a heartbeat. Her voice was softer than he'd imagined. Younger, but not in age, young in hope in a way that hadn't been completely crushed yet. It made something inside him soften, then sharpen with protective instinct. He knew he had to be careful. One wrong word, one wrong hint of what he was, and she would either slam the door or, worse, invite him in with the wrong kind of fear. Luna, he said, his voice low and steady, carrying easily through the door. You don't know me, but you wrote to me. The hallway seemed to pull tighter around those words, as if the very air were listening. Inside, Luna's heart lurched so hard she pressed a hand to her chest. Her mind tried to catch up. Wrote to me, the mailbox. The letter she dropped with a shaky laugh, half certain it would land in some forgotten bin, never to be seen again. For a moment she was sure it was a cruel joke. Someone had found the letter, someone from her building was mocking her. Heat rushed to her face, shame pressed at her throat. Okay, very funny, she said, anger and hurt tangling in her words. Whoever you are, that's not cool, just leave, okay, I don't. I read every line, the voice said softly, cutting gently through her panic. You were honest, you were kind, even to the people who hurt you. You said you felt invisible, even when you spoke up. You said you were still trying not to give up. The world stopped. Nobody knew those exact words. She hadn't shown the letter to anyone. It had gone from her hand to the mailbox to nowhere, nowhere she could understand. Her knees almost gave out. She braced herself against the door, the cool wood pressing into her forehead as she leaned closer without meaning to. Who are you? She whispered. It wasn't a demand anymore, it was a plea. On the other side, the vampire king of a hidden realm stood in a dim, human hallway, rainwater still clinging to the edges of his coat. He could have lied. He could have given any name, played any game, but something in him refused to start this with anything less than truth. The name I gave your kind, he said quietly, is older than this building, older than this city. It has twisted into stories I no longer recognize, but the name you used in your letter, that one still belongs to me. He lifted his hand and rested his palm flat against the door, leaving a faint, cold imprint Luna couldn't see but could almost feel. You called me the Vampire King, he said, and I came because you dared to believe a monster might be kind. Luna's breath shattered. Every part of her brain screamed that this was impossible, ridiculous, dangerous. But beneath all that, in a place logic couldn't quite touch, something stirred. The same stubborn hope that had pushed her to write the letter in the first place rose again, shaking and fragile but alive. If this is real, she whispered, hardly aware she was speaking aloud, if you're real, what do you want from me? There was a pause. When Caelan answered, his voice was softer than the rain outside. Not hungry, not greedy, not commanding, just tired and strangely gentle. I want nothing from you, he said. I came because you asked for nothing and still kept your heart kind. I came because you wrote to me instead of to the darkness inside yourself, and because if no one answers a courage like that, this world becomes a little colder. Luna's fingers tightened around the chain lock. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She could feel without understanding how that whatever stood on the other side of the door was not human. The air felt different, thicker, older, but there was no sharp edge of cruelty in his words, only a grave sadness and a strange respect that almost scared her more than anger would have. Behind her, the glow of her computer screen flickered, lighting the cruel comments she'd just read. In front of her, the door stood between fear and a possibility that might break her heart if it turned out to be a lie. "If I open this door," she said slowly, every word an effort, "my life will change, won't it?" Caelan's hand was still on the wood. He wished, suddenly, fiercely, that he could promise her a simple path, one without consequences or unexpected shadows. But lies were for those who wanted power. He had enough of that. What he wanted now was something rarer. Yes," he answered honestly. "It will change, and so will mine." The silence fell. Outside, a distant siren wailed and faded. The building creaked softly as it settled. Somewhere down the hall, a faucet dripped in slow, stubborn beats. Luna's breath came in short, shaky bursts. She could almost feel the weight of centuries pressing against the other side of her thin door, waiting but not forcing, not demanding, just waiting for her choice. Her hand moved to the chain. She swallowed hard, eyes stinging with a mix of fear and something dangerously close to hope. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Okay." The chain rattled as she lifted it. She hesitated one last time, her fingers curling around the knob. Then, heart pounding loud enough for him to hear, Luna slowly began to open the door. In the moment the gap widened just enough for their eyes to almost meet, something in the hallway shifted. A sudden gust of icy wind blew through the corridor, snuffing out the dim light above them for a split second. In that brief darkness, Caelan felt a presence he had not sensed in decades, sharp, cold, and watching. He turned his head just slightly, his red eyes narrowing toward the far end of the hallway, where shadows seemed thicker than they should be. Someone or something else had also answered Luna's letter. The bulb flickered back to life with a harsh buzz, and Luna froze halfway, the door opened just a crack, caught between the stranger claiming to be a king and the suddenly hostile silence behind him. Caelan's voice dropped lower, urgency threading through his calm for the first time. "Luna," he said quietly, never taking his eyes off the darkness gathering at the end of the hall. "Whatever happens next, you must choose quickly." And as the shadows began to move, drawn by the same fragile light in her that had drawn him, Luna realized with a jolt that her letter had not only reached kindness in the dark. It had also awakened something else. Rain hammered the building as if trying to warn it. Luna's fingers were still wrapped around the doorknob, her breath shallow, when she saw him for the first time through the narrow gap. A tall figure in a dark coat, rainwater shining on the shoulders, pale hair catching the dim hallway light like frost. His eyes, she could just make them out, were a deep, impossible red, not wild, not hungry, but steady and strangely sad. She should have slammed the door. Instead, her grip tightened, caught between fear and a strange, fierce curiosity. But before her mind could decide anything, the air at the far end of the hallway rippled. Caelan turned his head slightly, just enough for Luna to see his profile tense. The calm line of his jaw hardened. The shadows near the staircase thickened, gathering like smoke. They didn't move with the gentle sway of ordinary darkness. They slid, low and deliberate, as if something inside them was crawling closer. "What is that?" Luna whispered, barely able to force the words out. Caelan didn't look at her. His voice, when it came, was controlled, but there was a new edge beneath it. "A mistake I allowed to live too long." The shadows twisted, and from within them, a figure stepped into the weak light. He looked like a man in his 30s, with slick dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and a smile too cold for his human features. His eyes, though his eyes were the color of ash, ringed with a faint, unnatural gold. His clothes were modern, expensive, immaculate, as if the rain couldn't touch him. Caelan, the newcomer, drawled, tasting the name like a taunt. "You never visit the human world anymore. I thought you'd forgotten how." Luna's heart stuttered. The stranger's gaze flicked to the narrow opening of her door, and she felt it like ice down her spine. He looked at her not as a person, but as a concept, as something to be used or broken. Caelan stepped subtly sideways, placing himself more directly between Luna's door and the newcomer. "Oh, you shouldn't be here, Darius," Caelan said. "We had an agreement." Darius's smile widened. "Yes, stay in your realm, watch from above, send your soft little dreams to the lonely." He tilted his head. "But you broke your own rule, my king. You came down, you made it interesting." Luna's fingers trembled on the doorknob. "Who is he?" she whispered, though her voice barely carried past the wood. Caelan shifted just enough that his shoulder brushed the door, as if to remind her of his presence. "An old ally who learned the wrong lessons from the dark," he said. Then, quiet enough that only she could hear, "Stay behind the door, Luna. Do not step into the hallway unless I tell you." Her throat tightened. Every instinct screamed to bolt the door, hide, pretend none of this was real. But something in Caelan's tone stopped her. It wasn't an order. It was a plea layered with a promise he hadn't spoken yet. Darius took a leisurely step closer, hands tucked into his coat pockets. "You should have ignored her letter," he said. "Like you ignore almost all of them now. One human soul teetering on the edge, all alone at night. That's not your territory anymore, that's mine." Luna's breath caught. Caelan's jaw clenched. "You prey on despair, that is not what our kind was meant to do." "Our kind," Darius laughed softly, the sound echoing off the narrow walls. "Listen to yourself, still clinging to old vows while the world rots from the inside out. These humans beg for darkness more honestly than they beg for light. They write letters to monsters, Caelan. What did you think would come when one finally answered?" His gaze slid to the door again. Luna shrank back instinctively, but Caelan moved with her, his body a quiet barrier. "My letter wasn't to you," Luna said suddenly, surprising herself. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to speak. "I don't know who you are, but I didn't ask for you." Darius's eyebrows lifted, amused. "Oh, but you did, little moon. Every time you looked in the mirror and thought you were nothing, every time you believed the voices that said you were weak, every time you wanted to vanish, you called to something." His smile sharpened. "You called to me." Her knees went weak. Those words hit too close. She had thought those things. She had whispered them to herself in the dark, believing no one heard. Caelan took a slow breath, his eyes never leaving Darius. "Luna," he said, calm but firm, "listen to me. This is what despair does when it puts on a face. It will sound like it knows you. It will sound like it owns you. It doesn't." Darius rolled his eyes. "There he goes, the comforting king. Tell me, Caelan, when you burn their letters, do you actually believe you've helped them?" "I burn the ones that ask for harm," Caelan said quietly, "not the ones that ask for hope." "Hope," Darius repeated like a bitter joke. "Look around you. This world doesn't run on hope anymore. It runs on anger and envy and fear. They feed me every day, and you deny them the one thing that actually listens back." He took another step, and the lights in the hallway dimmed, buzzing louder as if straining to stay on. "What do you want from her?" Caelan asked, his tone low and dangerous now. "The same thing you do," Darius said simply. "A choice." He leaned slightly to the side, his eyes locking on the small slice of Luna's face visible through the gap. "You wanted to disappear, didn't you?" he asked softly. "To stop being so tired, to stop feeling so much, to finally be somewhere you're not disappointing anyone. I can give you that. I can make all of this." He gestured lazily at the peeling walls, the flickering lights, the restless city beyond fall away. No more cruel comments, no more lonely nights, just silence, peace. The word peace slipped under her skin like a drug. For one terrible heartbeat, she actually imagined it. No more aching chest, no more pretending she was okay, no more fighting to be kind in a world that didn't notice. Just nothing, quiet. Her hand loosened on the door. Caelan heard the minute shift of her fingers, the flutter of her pulse. Without turning, he spoke directly to her, his voice softer but suddenly stronger than any promise of silence. "Luna," he said, "look at your hands." Confused, dazed by Darius's words, she blinked down at her fingers. They bore no scars, nothing dramatic. but she saw the faint ink stain near her nail from where her pen had slipped earlier, the small callus on her middle finger from years of writing, the way her knuckles were slightly reddened from gripping things too tightly when she was anxious. You wrote a letter instead of giving up, Caelan said. You stood up to people who wanted you to be quiet, even when it cost you. You feel everything too much, yes, but that is not a weakness. That is proof that your heart is still alive in a world that tries very hard to numb it. Darius's expression cooled. Beautiful speech, he said, but she's tired, aren't you, Luna? Don't you want it to stop hurting? Something inside her recoiled. He was right, she was tired. But the way he said it made her feel like a broken thing, like a problem to erase. I am tired, she admitted in a hoarse whisper, but I'm not trash. Her own words surprised her. Caelan's eyes flickered, pride like a flicker of warmth in his gaze. Darius's smile thinned. The shadows at his feet stirred restless. You're not listening, he said, and his voice lost its false gentleness. This world will keep chewing you up. You'll keep giving pieces of yourself to people who don't notice. You'll keep writing letters to legends and hoping for answers that never. She has won, Caelan cut in, his voice suddenly as sharp as it was calm. Now. Darius's gaze snapped back to him. Power rolled off him in a cold wave, making the hallway feel smaller, tighter. Then prove it, he said. Let's see how much your mercy is worth against their hunger for release. For a moment, the two men, one in frost and red, one in gold and shadow, simply stared at each other. The air pressed thickly around them like the hallway was too small for this much history. Luna's pulse hammered. What is happening? She whispered. Are you going to fight here? No, Caelan said, and there was iron in that single word. Not like the stories you know. There will be no blood on your floor tonight. He stepped forward only half a pace, but the shadows around Darius hesitated, rippling like something uncertain. You don't get to claim her just because she's hurting, Caelan said. Pain doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the one who still feels it and chooses what to do with it. He finally turned his head, just enough to let Luna see more of his face. The sharp lines softened by worry, the centuries weighed into the corners of his eyes, the hint of something almost shy under all that power. Luna, he said gently, you invited one thing tonight with your letter, a chance to be seen, not consumed. You asked if someone in the dark might see you and still choose kindness. That is the only invitation I answered, not his. Darius scoffed. You speak as if she has any real power here. She's one fragile human in a world that uses people like her up. She has more power than you think, Caelan replied calmly. Then to Luna, he cannot enter unless you open the door to him, not just this door, but the one inside you, the one that says, I am nothing, I give up, do whatever you want with me. If you say those words, he will have more room in your life than I ever could. If you choose otherwise, he has no right to stay. Luna swallowed hard. Choose what? She asked. I don't even know what I'm choosing between. Caelan's eyes held hers through the small opening. Between the lie that your pain makes you weak, he said, and the truth that your pain means you are still capable of loving a world that hasn't loved you properly yet. Her throat closed, tears burned hot behind her eyes. You don't know me, she whispered. You don't know how many times I almost. I know enough, he said softly. I know you spoke up for a coworker when you could have stayed silent and kept your job. I know you walked your neighbor's dog for weeks when she was sick, even when you were exhausted and never asked for thanks. I know you wrote that letter not begging to be turned into something powerful, but begging to be told you weren't foolish for being kind. Darius's face twisted. And what did that kindness get you? Fired, exhausted, alone in a crumbling building at 3 a.m., listening to strangers tear you apart online. Tell me, Luna, has kindness ever truly protected you? A single tear slipped down her cheek. No, she whispered, it hasn't. Her hand loosened again. Darius smiled, sensing the shift. But it protected them, she added, surprising herself again. Her voice was tiny but steady. The coworker who didn't lose her job, the neighbor who didn't have to worry about her dog, the kids I tutored who finally passed their exams. Maybe it didn't protect me, but it protected someone. Caelan closed his eyes briefly, something like relief moving across his face. That, he said quietly, is why I came. Darius hissed out a breath, anger finally cracking his smooth facade. You can't survive like this, he snapped at her. The world doesn't reward martyrs, it devours them. You keep giving and giving until there's nothing left, and then what? Who remembers you? Luna thought of the little boy she tutored who had hugged her so tightly when he passed his test. She thought of the neighbor's weak, grateful smile. She thought of the letter she'd written, of the ridiculous address, of the part of her that had still believed maybe, somehow, someone kind existed in the dark. Maybe no one remembers, she said, voice shaking but honest. But that doesn't mean it was meaningless. The silence slammed into the hallway. Caelan's gaze on her was suddenly fierce, like a storm held perfectly in place. In that moment, the choice snapped into focus for her, not like a magical ritual, not like some dramatic contract, but as something painfully human. If she believed Darius, then her kindness was a waste, her pain proof she was foolish, her tiredness a reason to surrender. If she believed Caelan, then her kindness mattered, even if it hurt, even if it wasn't rewarded, even if no one sang songs about it. It mattered because it came from her. I'm so tired, she whispered, but I don't want to disappear, not like that. Darius's expression went flat. Then you'll keep suffering, he said coldly. Maybe, she said, but I'll suffer on my feet, not in your hands. Very slowly, with fingers that still shook, Luna pushed the door open the rest of the way and stepped forward. Not into the hallway, not yet. Just close enough that her full face was visible, her tear-streaked cheeks, her tangled hair, her bare feet on the threshold. Close enough that she stood in the line between inside and out, between fear and courage. Oh, she lifted her chin. I don't invite you in, she said to Darius, each word costing her effort. You don't get me, not tonight, not ever. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the shadows at Darius's feet recoiled, hissing silently like disturbed smoke. The lights above flickered hard, then flared brighter than they'd been all night. A faint crackling tension snapped in the air, like a string pulled too tight and suddenly cut. Darius's eyes narrowed into slits. You think a single choice changes everything, he said softly. You'll still feel alone tomorrow, you'll still read things that hurt, you'll still wake up tired and scared. Luna's voice broke, but she didn't look away. Maybe, she said again, but I'll wake up. Her hand curled against the door frame. And I'll decide one more day what to do with the fact that I'm still here. Caelan took one small step closer to her, still between her and Darius, his presence like a shield she hadn't known she needed. You heard her, Caelan said, and now his tone brooked no argument. She has chosen. Power slid into his words then, an older, deeper authority than anger. The kind born from centuries of keeping promises nobody thanked him for. Darius stared at him, then at Luna. Whatever he saw there made his lip curl, not in childish rage, but in a colder, more dangerous frustration. This isn't over, he said quietly. You can't stand at her door every night, Caelan. You can't watch every thought. One day when she's tired enough, when the world has taken even more from her, I'll knock again. And maybe then she won't answer with speeches. Caelan's gaze burned like embers. If you knock, he said, you will find I am still listening. That is the difference between us, Darius. You wait for them to break, I wait for them to reach. The two immortals held each other's stare for a long, taut moment. Then Darius smiled, a thin, empty thing, and stepped backward into the deeper dark. The shadows swallowed him, thinning, stretching, and finally sinking back into the ordinary gloom of an old hallway at night. Oh, the buzzing light steadied. The dripping faucet down the hall went back to its soft, regular plinking. It was just a building again. Just a girl in a doorway. Just a man who wasn't a man, standing in the wet footprint of something that could have gone very differently. Over a few seconds, nobody spoke. Luna's legs shook so badly she had to lean harder against the frame. Her heart thudded heavy and uneven, like it didn't know whether to panic or rest. Is he gone? She asked, her voice barely above a breath. For now, Caelan said quietly. He was never meant to stay. Despair is a visitor, Luna, not a landlord unless you hand it the keys. A watery laugh escaped her, half sob, half disbelief. That sounds poetic, she said, wiping at her cheeks. I don't feel very poetic. I feel like I might throw up. A small, unexpected smile touched his mouth. It softened his whole face, making him look, just for a moment, almost human. "Oh, that is a very human response," he said. "It means you are still here." She studied him properly now for the first time. The sharp elegance of his bone structure, the old-fashioned cut of his clothes made subtle by the darkness, the way his eyes held a depth she couldn't quite name. There was power, yes, but also something gentler, like a warrior who carried not just scars, but memories of holding broken things carefully. "You really read my letter," she said, stunned all over again. "You really came." "I did," he answered simply. "Your words reached farther than you thought." "Why?" she asked, not accusing, honestly curious. "There must be so many letters, so many people hurting, why mine?" He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth to place on her shoulders. Then he spoke with the same quiet honesty he had used all night. "Because you asked for nothing but to be told that your kindness was not a mistake," he said. "Most letters beg for escape, for power, for someone else to hurt instead. Yours begged to know if staying gentle in a hard world was foolish. I could not in good conscience leave that question unanswered." Luna bit her lip. "And is it foolish?" He shook his head once, slow and certain. "No, it is the bravest thing I have seen in a long time." The words hit her harder than she expected. Brave, nobody called her that. People called her sensitive, naive, too soft. Hearing that same softness named as courage made something warm and painful bloom in her chest. "I don't feel brave," she admitted. "Bravery rarely feels like a roar," Caelan said. "Most of the time, it feels like taking one more small step when your legs are shaking." His eyes flicked gently to her bare feet, like standing in a doorway when someone like Darius tries to convince you to let go. She followed his gaze, then looked back up at him, a shy, crooked smile tugging at her mouth. "So what now?" she asked. "You just go back, forget about me." His expression shifted, something like hurt quickly masked. "I do not forget easily," he said softly, "especially not those who stand on the edge and choose to step back from it." A wave of strange comfort washed over her. "Will he come back?" she asked, thinking of the shadows, the way his words had found her worst thoughts. "Despair," Caelan said, he considered. "In one form or another, yes, it always does, but now you know it is not a god, it is a guest." His gaze deepened. "And you know you are allowed to say no." She nodded slowly. "And you," she said, then winced at how needy the question sounded. "I mean sorry, that sounded clingy." "It sounded human," he replied gently. "And to answer, I do not know the shape of tomorrow, but I can make you a promise for tonight." He took a small step closer to the doorway, careful, as if not wanting to overwhelm her. The air around him was cool but not biting, like midnight wind after a long, hot day. "You are not ridiculous for being kind," he said. "You are not weak for still hoping someone will see you. You are not foolish for feeling deeply. And you are not alone, even when it feels like it." Her eyes filled again. "You say that like you know what it's like." His gaze drifted for a moment past her to some memory she couldn't see. "I have ruled a kingdom from the shadows for longer than your history books remember," he said quietly. "Surrounded by those who fear me, admired by those who want what I can do but very rarely understood." His lips twitched in a sad half-smile. "Loneliness is not only a human disease." Luna's throat tightened. For the first time, she saw him not as a legend, but as someone standing in a hallway at 3 a.m., as tired in his own way as she was. "I wrote to you because I hoped a monster might be kind," she said softly. "I didn't think about you, about what you might need." "I did not come because I needed," he replied, "but it seems I am leaving with something I did not expect." "What's that?" she asked. He met her gaze. The reminder that this world still holds hearts like yours, he said simply. It makes the endless watching feel less empty. A warmth rose to her cheeks that had nothing to do with embarrassment. It felt like standing near a fireplace after being cold for a very long time. They stood there, a girl and a king, in the doorway of a small, worn-out apartment, while the rain outside softened from a roar to a steady hush. Caelan, she said suddenly, tasting the name like a secret, is it okay if I call you that? He blinked once, then nodded. It is more truly mine than the titles humans gave me. Okay, she said. Caelan, if I write again, will you write it? A quiet light touched his eyes. I will, he said. I cannot promise I will always come in person. The line between our worlds is not so easily crossed, but your words will never vanish into nothing. They will be seen. She nodded, holding onto that like a rope. What do I do now? She asked. Just go back to my life, act like nothing happened. He studied her for a moment, then shook his head. No, you go back to your life knowing something did happen. You keep being kind, but you also learn to be kind to yourself. You rest when you are tired. You choose the voices you let into your room. You remember that when the dark whispers you are alone, it is lying. A small, unsteady laugh escaped her. That's a lot of homework. He smiled a little more fully this time. You have time. The clock on her wall ticked softly, 3:11 a.m. The night felt different now, not lighter. Her problems hadn't magically disappeared. Her job was still gone, the comments were still there. The city was still the same tired beast outside her window, but something inside her had shifted, like a tiny door opening in the opposite direction of despair. Will you be okay? She asked suddenly. It felt strange to ask that of someone so powerful, but the question came anyway. He looked faintly surprised and then deeply moved. I will, he said, tonight more than most nights. He paused, because I will return knowing that one more human chose to keep her light even when it hurt to hold it. Her eyes burned again, but this time the tears felt cleaner. Less like drowning, more like something washing through. Thank you, she said. The words were too small, but they were all she had. He inclined his head, a regal gesture softened by the intimacy of the narrow hallway. Thank you, Luna, for writing, for believing even when you doubted, for not giving your pain to the wrong hands. Well, he took a step back. The distance between them felt suddenly huge. Will I see you again? She asked before she could stop herself. His answer was gentle but not entirely comforting. Perhaps not like this, he said, but on nights when you feel the darkness pressing closer and you choose stubbornly to be kind anyway, know that somewhere I am watching and your choice matters more than you will ever know. The hallway light flickered just once as if bowing with him. Good night, Luna, he said softly. Good night, Caelan, she replied. He turned and walked toward the stairwell. His footsteps made almost no sound, but the air seemed to thin in his wake as if the building itself were exhaling. When he reached the shadow at the bend of the stairs, he paused once, hand resting lightly on the rail. Without looking back, he said, Remember, you are not foolish for hoping. The world changes only because of people who do. Then he stepped into the shadow and was gone. For the record, Arami said quietly, I am glad you went. Caelan inclined his head. So am I. Down below in a small third-floor apartment, Luna finished her second letter that wasn't a letter. At the end, she wrote, I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I'm still scared. I'm still tired. But tonight, when the dark told me I was nothing, I told it no. And for the first time in a long time, I'm proud of myself. If you ever read this, I want you to know your coming here mattered, but my choosing did too. Well, thank you for saying me. Oh, Luna. She saved it not in a mailbox, but in a folder she named almost shyly, Letters to the Dark That Loves the Light. Then she turned off her lamp. The room sank into shadows, but they felt different now. Less like a tide trying to pull her under, more like a blanket she could rest beneath without disappearing. As she lay down, exhaustion finally wrapped around her. But beneath it, like a small, stubborn ember, something new glowed, the knowledge that her heart, tired and bruised as it was, still belonged to her. And that somewhere in a place between worlds, a weary king of the night had read her words and remembered his own promise to protect those who stood on the edge and chose to step back. Luna closed her eyes. She did not fall asleep smiling exactly, but she did fall asleep holding onto one quiet, fierce truth. Her kindness had not been a mistake. And in a world that so often fed on fear, that was a power more immortal than any throne in the dark.